What if the first woman wasn't Eve? What if the story you've known your whole life has a secret chapter, one deliberately erased from Genesis? Recently, a forgotten name has been whispered across the world: Lilith. The story of Adam's first equal partner has surfaced like a lost artifact, a forbidden movie capturing the minds of millions. It's a powerful narrative of a woman who chose exile over subservience, freedom over a gilded cage. For many, she is a hero, a symbol of truth finally brought to light. For others, she is a dangerous myth, a lie designed to twist scripture. But the most important question isn't simply what the story says. The real question, the one that lingers in the silence after the credits roll, is where did it come from? What is the forbidden book behind the legend of Lilith? Where is the evidence for this incredible claim? For centuries, the answers have been sealed away, hidden in plain sight within the dusty shelves of forgotten libraries and the margins of censored texts. Here, we are not just storytellers. We are spiritual archaeologists. Our mission is to excavate, to uncover, to present the evidence that the gatekeepers left behind. In this declassified file, we will follow the trail of clues from the faint scars in the Bible itself to the heart of ancient mystery. The story you've heard is not the end of the search. It is the beginning of the excavation. Let's begin. Every investigation begins at the crime scene, searching for the one piece of evidence everyone else overlooked. Before we venture into the forbidden books and secret histories, our search for Lilith must start within the official record itself, the Bible. Most believe her name is entirely absent from its pages, a complete fabrication from later myths. But that is not entirely true. There is one single, haunting mention. A fingerprint left on the wall of a sealed room. To find it, we must go to the book of Isaiah, chapter 34. Here, the prophet paints a terrifying picture of God's judgment upon the land of Edom. He describes a wasteland, a cursed and desolate place where civilization has collapsed and only wild, chaotic creatures remain. It's a vision of the world undone, returned to a primordial chaos. And in this apocalyptic landscape, among the wild cats, hyenas, and goat demons, Isaiah says this in verse 14. There too shall the Lilith alight, and find for herself a resting place. Lilith. The name is right there, preserved in the original Hebrew text. So why has it been a secret? Why don't you see her name in most modern English Bibles? This is where the excavation truly begins. The word Lilith is what scholars call a hapax legomenon, a technical term for a word that appears only once in the entire body of a text. This single appearance created a puzzle for translators centuries later. With no other context in the Bible to compare it to, they were forced to guess. In your Bible, you might find it translated as screech owl, night hag, night monster, or night creature. The uncertainty is the clue. The confusion of the translators tells us they were dealing with something ancient, a name whose true, terrifying meaning was already becoming lost to the mainstream, or perhaps was being deliberately obscured. To translate this word as a simple owl is to sanitize the text. It is an attempt to domesticate something wild, to neatly categorize a presence that defies easy explanation. But this isn't a mistake in translation. It is scar tissue in the manuscript. It is an echo from a much older world. The prophet Isaiah wasn't inventing a creature. He was referencing a figure his audience would have instantly recognized and feared. A figure from the shadows of folklore. A name whispered in warnings to protect children in the night. This single word confirms the suspicion that many have felt when reading the scripture psalms, that there are layers to the story that have been smoothed over. Characters and concepts that have been written out of the main script, leaving only faint traces behind. It's proof that a story existed long before the one we were given. To understand who this Lilith was that Isaiah spoke of, we cannot look forward to modern translations. We must dig backward. We must travel to the world that existed before and during the time of the prophets, a world steeped in the myths and legends of ancient Mesopotamia. The name was not born in Israel. It was an import. A dark goddess carried on the winds from the empires of Babylon and Sumeria. That single, lonely word in Isaiah is not the beginning of the story. It is the end of an old one, a final, fading clue pointing us toward a much deeper, much more shocking origin. It tells us that to find the real Lilith, we must look outside the official walls. We must look for the texts that were not just edited, but erased. The single word in Isaiah was the key, but this is the locked room it opens. It proved a memory of Lilith existed within the official record, but it gave us no story, no motive, no crime. To find that, we must turn to the Apocrypha, the collection of texts that exist in the shadows of the canon. We are now declassifying the central file in the Lilith investigation. A controversial, satirical, and profoundly influential medieval Jewish text known as the Alphabet of Ben Sira. Written somewhere between the 8th and 10th centuries AD, this is not a lost book of the Bible. It is a work of folklore and commentary. Yet, it contains the first ever detailed, written account of Lilith as Adam's first wife. Within these pages, we find the script, the source code for the forbidden movie that millions are now watching. According to the Ben Sira file, the story begins much like the competitor's narrative because that narrative is pulled directly from here. The text states that when God saw Adam was alone, he created a woman for him from the earth, just as he had created Adam. Her name was Lilith. They immediately began to quarrel. The conflict, as described in this ancient file, was explicit. Adam demanded she lie beneath him during intercourse. Lilith refused, arguing, "Why must I lie beneath you? I also was made from dust, and therefore I am your equal." Sein. This was not a simple argument over position. It was a profound theological and ideological battle over hierarchy versus equality, compressed into a single, powerful metaphor. Adam represented order and an assumed authority. Lilith represented an innate sense of self-worth, refusing to be defined as subordinate simply because of the established order. This is the ancient root of the conflict that resonates so strongly with audiences today. Her defiance did not end with words. According to Ben Sira, Lilith did something shocking, an act of immense power and blasphemy. She pronounced the ineffable name of God, the sacred, unspoken name of the Creator. And in doing so, she harnessed its power and flew away, escaping the Garden of Eden on her own terms. Her departure was not an expulsion. It was a declaration of independence. In response, God dispatched 3 angels, Senoi, Sansenoi, and Samangalaf, with a command to bring her back. They found her at the Red Sea, a place that in ancient lore often represents chaos and the untamed world. They delivered God's ultimatum: return to Adam, or 100 of your children will die each day. Here, Lilith makes her fateful choice. She refuses to return to a life of subservience in paradise, choosing instead a life of freedom in the wilderness, even at a terrible cost. But she does not simply refuse. She makes a pact. She tells the angels that while she accepts her fate as a danger to human newborns, she will not harm any child who is protected by an amulet bearing the names or images of the 3 angels. This pact is the Rosetta Stone for understanding Lilith's transformation in folklore from a rebellious wife to a feared nocturnal demon who preys on infants. It is the origin story for thousands of years of traditions involving protective charms placed in the rooms of newborns. The narrative presented in the Ben Sira file gives us all the core elements: the equal creation, the struggle for dominance, the escape, the 3 angels, and the tragic pact. It is the foundational document. We have now opened the case file. But this is not the end of our excavation. For the story of Ben Sira, as detailed as it is, was itself drawing upon whispers and legends from an even more mystical and ancient source. The question is no longer what the story is, but how deep do its roots truly go? To find out, we must go deeper into the archives, into the esoteric world of Jewish mysticism. The single word in Isaiah was the key, but this is the locked room it opens. It proved a memory of Lilith existed within the official record, but it gave us no story, no motive, no crime. To find that, we must turn to the Apocrypha, the collection of texts that exist in the shadows of the canon. We are now declassifying the central file in the Lilith investigation, a controversial, satirical, and profoundly influential medieval Jewish text known as the Alphabet of Ben Sira. Written somewhere between the 8th and 10th centuries AD, this is not a lost book of the Bible. It is a work of folklore and commentary. Yet, it contains the first ever detailed written account of Lilith as Adam's first wife. Within these pages, we find the script, the source code for the forbidden movie that millions are now watching. According to the Ben Sira file, the story begins much like the narrative you may have seen, because that narrative is pulled directly from here. The text states that when God saw Adam was alone, he created a woman for him from the earth, just as he had created Adam. Her name was Lilith. They immediately began to quarrel. The conflict, as described in this ancient file, was explicit and symbolic. Adam demanded she lie beneath him during physical intimacy. Lilith refused, arguing, "Why must I lie beneath you? I also was made from dust, and therefore I am your equal." This was not a simple argument over position. It was a profound theological and ideological battle over hierarchy versus equality, compressed into a single, powerful metaphor. Adam represented order and an assumed authority. Lilith represented an innate sense of self-worth, refusing to be defined as subordinate simply because of the established structure. This is the ancient root of the conflict that resonates so strongly with audiences today. Her defiance did not end with words. According to Ben Sira, Lilith did something shocking, an act of immense power and blasphemy. She pronounced the ineffable name of God, the sacred, unspoken name of the Creator, and in doing so, she harnessed its power and flew away, escaping the Garden of Eden on her own terms. Her departure was not an expulsion. It was a declaration of independence. This act forced God's hand, leading to the next critical scene in the file. God dispatched 3 angels, Senoi, Sansenoi, and Samangalaf, with a command to bring her back. They found her at the Red Sea, a place that in ancient lore often represents chaos and the untamed world, a space outside divine order. They delivered God's ultimatum: return to Adam, or 100 of your children will die each day. Here, Lilith makes her fateful choice. She refuses to return to a life of subservience in paradise, choosing instead a life of freedom in the wilderness, even at a terrible cost. But she does not simply refuse. She establishes a pact. This is a crucial detail many retellings omit. She tells the angels that while she accepts her fate as a danger to human newborns, a direct consequence of her own children's daily deaths, she will not harm any child who is protected by an amulet bearing the names or images of the 3 angels who confronted her. This pact is the Rosetta Stone for understanding Lilith's transformation in folklore from a rebellious wife to a feared nocturnal demon who preys on infants. It is the origin story for thousands of years of traditions involving protective charms placed in the rooms of newborns across various cultures. The narrative presented in the Ben Sira file gives us all the core elements: the equal creation, the struggle for dominance, the escape via sacred knowledge, the 3 angels, and the tragic pact. It is the foundational document. We have now opened the primary case file. But this is not the end of our excavation. For the story of Ben Sira, as detailed as it is, was itself drawing upon whispers and legends from an even more mystical and ancient source. The question is no longer what the story is, but how deep do its roots truly go? To find out, we must go deeper into the archives, into the esoteric world of Jewish mysticism, where Lilith is not just a character, but a cosmic force. Our excavation has uncovered the foundational narrative in the alphabet of Ben Sira. That medieval file gave us the plot, the characters, and the conflict that defines the popular story of Lilith. But if we stop there, we are merely scratching the surface. The Lilith of Ben Sira is a figure of folklore, but to truly understand her power and why she has haunted the spiritual imagination for centuries, we must descend into the esoteric heart of Jewish mysticism, the Kabbalah. We are no longer reading simple stories. We are now attempting to decipher the mystical blueprint of creation itself. Our primary piece of evidence in this chapter is the Zohar, or the Book of Splendor, the foundational work of Kabbalistic literature, compiled in the 13th century. In these texts, Lilith is no longer just Adam's rebellious first wife. She is elevated, or rather deepened, into a cosmic principle, a force of universal significance. The Zohar paints a far more terrifying and complex portrait. Here, Lilith is identified as the queen of the Sitra Achra, a term that translates to the other side. This is the realm of spiritual impurity, the shadow world that exists as a mirror opposite to the divine realm of holiness. She is not just an exile living by the Red Sea. She is the ruler of a demonic kingdom. The Zohar describes her as a seductive and dangerous entity who preys on men, especially scholars who study the Torah alone at night. She is a succubus who steals their life force, their spiritual essence, to give birth to legions of demonic children. The pact she made with the angels in the Ben Sira story is given a darker, more spiritual dimension here. Her threat is not just to the physical lives of infants, but to the spiritual purity of all mankind. But her most profound role in Kabbalah is as the dark counterpart to another divine feminine figure, the Shekinah. In Jewish mysticism, the Shekinah represents the divine feminine presence of God in the world, the nurturing, compassionate, light-filled aspect of creation. Lilith becomes her shadow, her demonic twin. Where the Shekinah is the mother of souls in the divine realm, Lilith is the mother of demons in the realm of impurity. One represents sacred union and holy matrimony. The other represents seduction, lust, and unions that create only chaos. This duality reveals a deep theological anxiety about the power of the feminine. It must be split into two halves: the good, submissive, nurturing aspect to be embraced, Eve and the Shekinah, and the bad, independent, and chaotically powerful aspect to be feared and cast out, Lilith. This transformation is critical. The Lilith of Ben Sira was a rebel fighting for personal equality in the garden. The Lilith of the Zohar is a force of cosmic imbalance, a seductive darkness that threatens the very soul of humanity. The mystics who wrote the Zohar took the folk tale and imbued it with immense spiritual weight, making her a necessary part of the cosmic drama, the darkness required to define the light. We have seen her now as a rebel wife and a demonic queen. But even this is not the source. This, too, is an interpretation, a later layer built upon an even older foundation. The name itself, the very concept of a winged nocturnal female entity who threatens children and seduces men, was not born in medieval Judaism. It was an ancient memory, an echo from a fallen empire. To find her true origin, we must leave the mystical libraries and travel back in time to the sun-scorched clay tablets of ancient Mesopotamia. If the alphabet of Ben Sira is the case file, and the Zohar is the psychological profile, then our next destination is the archaeological dig site itself. The mystics didn't invent the dark queen of the night from nothing. They were tapping into a cultural memory, a primordial fear that had haunted the ancient Near East for millennia before the Hebrew scriptures were ever written. To find the genesis of Lilith, we must look before the book of Genesis. Our evidence is no longer parchment scrolls, but hardened clay tablets. Our language is not Hebrew, but the wedge-shaped cuneiform of the world's first civilizations, Sumer, Akkad, and Babylon. It is here, in modern-day Iraq, that we find the true, terrifying origins of Lilith. Long before she was ever imagined as Adam's wife, the Lilitu were a well-known terror of the ancient world. In Mesopotamian demonology, the Lilitu were not a single person, but a class of spirits. They were wind demons, spirits of the desolate wastes, the exact same kind of haunted landscape the prophet Isaiah would later describe. These entities were infamous. They were believed to be sexually insatiable, yet barren, unable to have normal children or relationships. Because of this, they were filled with a jealous rage, known to stalk men in their sleep, seducing them and stealing their seed to birth demonic offspring. Most terrifyingly, they were seen as a mortal danger to pregnant women and infants, snatching newborns from their cradles in the dead of night. This ancient fear is the direct ancestor of the pact Lilith makes in the Ben Sira story. The very reason she becomes associated with harming children. The evidence for this is not just textual, it is physical. Archaeologists have unearthed thousands of incantation bowls from this region. These were magical clay bowls, inscribed with spells and buried upside down under the floors of homes to trap evil spirits. And on hundreds of these bowls, the names of the Lilitu are explicitly mentioned, begging for protection from these night terrors. But perhaps the most stunning artifact is a terracotta plaque known as the Burney Relief, or the Queen of the Night. Dating back to almost 4,000 years ago, it depicts a powerful, winged, nude female figure with the talons of a bird of prey. She is flanked by owls, the quintessential night creature, and stands upon the backs of 2 lions. While scholars debate her precise identity, she perfectly embodies the ancient concept of the Lilitu, powerful, seductive, winged, and connected to the wild, untamed night. This may be the closest thing we have to a photograph of the entity that would one day become Lilith. So how did this Mesopotamian demon become the first wife of the biblical Adam? The myth did not appear out of thin air. It evolved. It was recycled. During the Babylonian exile in the 6th century BC, the Hebrew people were forcibly immersed in this culture. They lived among these stories and fears for generations. They absorbed the concept of a dangerous female night demon and synchronized it with their own folklore. The name Lilith was adopted. Her myth was eventually grafted onto the Genesis creation story, a way to explain and contain this powerful, pre-existing pagan figure within a Jewish framework. She was transformed from a primal demon into a human rebel. The story we see today is the end result of a long and complex evolution. Lilith was not born in the Garden of Eden. Her story began thousands of years earlier, written in clay. We have now excavated down to the bedrock of the myth. Now, we must ascend back through the layers and ask a critical question. When these ancient stories were patched together, what were the cracks they left behind? In our excavation, a pattern emerges. As spiritual archaeologists, we must pay close attention not only to the artifacts we find, but also to the places where the earth has been disturbed, where the layers don't quite match up. Many of you, our fellow investigators, have pointed out these very disturbances in the comments. You've asked the right questions, the ones that reveal the seams where different stories have been stitched together. You've asked, if the Garden of Eden was perfect, why were there sick animals? How could Adam and Lilith know of fear and jealousy before eating from the tree of knowledge? These are not plot holes, they are theological fault lines, and they reveal more about the story's true origin than the narrative itself. Let's start with the first major contradiction: the existence of suffering in a perfect world. The video you may have seen depicts Lilith healing a wounded lion and referencing roots that fight infection. This directly contradicts the core biblical concept of a flawless, deathless paradise before the fall. The answer is that this detail is a narrative fossil, a remnant of a much older world that was carried into the Genesis setting. The story of Eden as a place without death or disease is a cornerstone of Judeo-Christian theology. However, the myth of Lilith, as we uncovered in the last chapter, has its roots in Mesopotamia. The Mesopotamian worldview was different. Their gods inhabited a world that was already filled with the cycles of life and death, sickness and struggle. The detail of Lilith as a healer, one who understands the bitter roots and the pain of animals, is an echo of her ancient role as a nature spirit, a goddess connected to the raw, untamed world as it truly is, not an idealized version of it. When later storytellers merged this ancient character into the biblical garden, they brought her attributes with them, inadvertently creating a paradox that reveals her foreign origin. The second contradiction is even more profound: the presence of complex, fallen emotions in a state of innocence. The story shows Lilith and Adam arguing over dominance, feeling pride, and experiencing a desire for things beyond their grasp. How is this possible before they partook of the fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? Again, this is a clash of two entirely different narrative frameworks. The canonical story of Adam and Eve is about a journey from childlike innocence to moral awareness. They do not know shame, fear, or pride until after the transgression. The story of Lilith, however, is not a story about innocence at all. It is a political and psychological drama from its very first line. It assumes its characters already possess a complex sense of self, ego, and the capacity for defiance. It's a story about power dynamics, not the dawn of consciousness. When you place these psychologically mature characters into the innocent garden, the logic collapses. It's like putting characters from a modern political thriller into a children's fairy tale. Their motivations and knowledge simply don't belong, creating the very inconsistencies you have rightly identified. Finally, there is the matter of her powers. If Lilith was human, made from dust just like Adam, how did she suddenly grow wings and later transform into a serpent? This is perhaps the clearest fingerprint of her true ancient identity. Her wings were not a mutation. They were a revelation. In the story, this transformation symbolizes her casting off the human form she was placed in and reclaiming her primordial nature as a winged Lilitu spirit. The serpent form is similar, a powerful symbolic act. Snakes in ancient cultures represented hidden wisdom, rebirth, and a connection to the earth, all attributes of the Lilith character. These transformations are the story's way of admitting that she was never truly just a human. She was always something more, something older and wilder. These cracks don't discredit the story. They reveal its secret history. They are the fingerprints of the editors, the gatekeepers who tried to stitch together two different worlds. This leads us to the ultimate question. Who were these gatekeepers? And what was their motive for trying to tame and ultimately to erase this story? We have followed the evidence from a single word in Isaiah to a medieval case file and all the way back to the clay tablets of Babylon. We have seen how the myth of Lilith was assembled over thousands of years. Now, we must confront the most critical question of all. Why? Why was this complex, ancient, and powerful story left out of the canonical Bible? Why was Lilith silenced? The silence was not an accident of history. It was a decision, an act of theological censorship performed by the figures we call the gatekeepers. These were not a shadowy cabal, but a long series of early church fathers, rabbinic councils, and scholarly committees over centuries who were tasked with a monumental job: to compile a single, unified, and authoritative scripture from a vast collection of competing texts and oral traditions. Their goal was to create clarity and doctrinal purity. And in their eyes, the story of Lilith was a threat to both. The first, and perhaps most powerful, motive for her erasure was the threat she posed to the patriarchal order. The story of Eve's creation from Adam's rib in Genesis 2 became the divine foundation for a social structure that endured for millennia. It presents a clear hierarchy. Woman is derivative of man, created from him and for him. This narrative was the ultimate justification for a world in which men led and women followed. Lilith's story obliterates that foundation. She was created from the same earth at the same time as an equal. She refused to submit, arguing that her equality was divinely given. She did not plead or bargain. She spoke the name of God and left on her own terms. To the gatekeepers, this story was theologically radioactive. To include it in the canon would be to legitimize female rebellion against male authority at the very dawn of creation. It provided a divine precedent for women to reject their designated roles. She wasn't just an inconvenient character, she was a threat to the entire social and religious system they were building. She had to be silenced. The second motive was the need for theological simplicity. The story of the fall in Genesis is a clean, though profound, narrative. It explains the origin of sin through a single act of disobedience by two initially innocent beings. The Lilith narrative makes everything messy. It introduces a failed first marriage in a supposedly perfect paradise. It raises uncomfortable questions about God's plan. Was Lilith a mistake? If God intended for Adam to have a submissive partner, why did he create an equal one first? The story of Eve is simple. She is the mother of all living. The story of Lilith is complex. She is the mother of demons. For the sake of a clear, teachable doctrine that could be passed down through generations, the more complicated, morally ambiguous first draft of creation had to be cut. Eve was simply a better fit for the straightforward story they needed to tell. Finally, Lilith had to be silenced because she was a ghost from a past the gatekeepers were trying to bury. As we discovered, her origins are not Hebrew. They are Mesopotamian. She is a direct descendant of pagan wind demons. A primary goal of the early biblical compilers was to purify their monotheistic faith, to distinguish it from the polytheistic religions of their neighbors. Lilith was a stark, uncomfortable reminder of that pagan world. To give her a central role in the creation story would be to place a Babylonian demoness at the very beginning of humanity. So they performed a masterful act of theological editing. They demoted her. She was cast out of the creation narrative and returned to her ancient role as a creature of the desolate wastes, mentioned only once in a prophecy of doom. They didn't just remove a chapter, they removed a choice. They removed a precedent for female equality at the very dawn of time. But while they erased her from the pages, they could not erase her from memory. And in our modern world, her ghost has returned with a vengeance. The gatekeepers may have removed Lilith from the official record, but they could not remove her from the human psyche. The reason her story, once rediscovered, has spread with such viral intensity is because it speaks to something deep and primal within us. To understand why she haunts us, we must look beyond history and into the realm of archetypes. In the landscape of the soul, Lilith and Eve are not just two women from a forgotten story. They are two powerful, competing archetypes of the feminine. Two fundamental patterns of being that exist within every person. Their story is our story. First, consider the archetype that was chosen. Eve. In the canonical narrative, she is created from Adam's rib. For Adam. Her very origin defines her in relation to another. She is the archetype of the partner, the companion, the nurturer. Her world is one of connection, of harmony within a given structure. Even her name in Hebrew, Chava, is linked to the word for life, and she is famously called the mother of all living. She represents the powerful, essential drive for community, for family, for the weaving of the social fabric that holds civilization together. The strength of the Eve archetype is the strength of the bond, the relationship, the selfless act of creating and sustaining life for the next generation. For millennia, this was presented as the sole, complete, and divinely sanctioned model for womanhood. Then there is the archetype that was rejected, Lilith. If Eve was created from Adam, Lilith was created from the same earth. If Eve's identity is relational, Lilith's is self-defined. She is the archetype of the sovereign individual, the wild woman, the seeker of truth. She is the part of the human spirit that refuses to be contained by a structure that diminishes her. While Eve finds comfort in the heart of the garden, Lilith finds meaning at its edges, in the unknown. She represents untamed nature, raw intuition, and a connection to a form of knowledge that is not given, but must be discovered for oneself. She is the voice that asks, "Why?" and is willing to walk into the wilderness to find the answer, even if it means walking alone. The story of Lilith gives a name and a divine origin to this wild, untamable part of the human spirit, the part that values its own truth above comfort and its own freedom above acceptance. So why, after centuries of silence, has her story returned with such force? Because we are living in an age that is questioning the very structures the gatekeepers sought to protect. For generations, the Lilith archetype was suppressed. It was demonized, labeled as dangerous, rebellious, and destructive. The only acceptable path was the path of Eve. But now, the whispers from the edge of the garden have become a roar. When a viewer in the comments says, "I see myself in Lilith," she is recognizing an archetypal energy within herself that has been culturally repressed. She is giving a name to the part of her that desires to explore, to question, to lead her own life, and to refuse to be made smaller for someone else's comfort. The story's resurgence is a sign of a collective psychological shift, a reintegration of a part of ourselves that was long ago exiled. Lilith and Eve are not good versus evil. They are the two essential poles of the human experience, the deep need for connection and the equally deep need for autonomy. The official story cast one out and kept the other. But the most radical version of the myth suggests a final, shocking reunion. It poses a question. What if the ultimate act of Lilith was not to abandon her sister in paradise, but to return in disguise, to offer her the one thing she herself was denied, a choice? We have followed Lilith into exile and seen Eve take her place in a garden now defined by a quiet imbalance. In the canonical story, this is where Lilith's role would end, and a new character, the Serpent, enters the stage to change human history forever. But the most radical reinterpretation of the myth, the powerful conclusion presented in the cinematic story that has captivated so many, suggests that they are one and the same. It proposes a final, shocking act in Lilith's story: that she returned to the garden she had fled, disguised as the very creature of the earth she so deeply understood. In this version, her goal was not to cause the fall of man out of spite or jealousy. Her goal was to offer Eve the one thing she herself valued above all else: knowledge, and the freedom that comes from a genuine choice. This interpretation is the most profound reframe of all. It transforms the villain of Genesis into the tragic hero of the entire human story. But as spiritual archaeologists, we must ask the critical question: where is the textual evidence for this specific plot twist? Is this idea found in the alphabet of Ben Sira? Is it detailed in the Zohar? The answer, upon careful excavation, is no. The explicit narrative of Lilith returning as a serpent to liberate Eve is largely a modern synthesis. It is a powerful weaving together of ancient archetypes, Gnostic philosophy, and contemporary ideals. It is not found in the ancient source texts themselves. However, the idea behind it, the concept of the serpent as a bringer of wisdom, not a tempter to sin, is very, very old. To understand it, we must open a file that the gatekeepers feared perhaps more than any other: the records of the Gnostics. The Gnostics were a diverse group of early Christian and pre-Christian mystics who held a radically different view of the Genesis story. For many Gnostic sects, the God of the Old Testament who created the physical world was not the true, ultimate God. He was a lesser, flawed creator, sometimes called the demiurge, who trapped human souls in material ignorance within his garden. In this view, the serpent was not a villain. It was a heroic messenger sent by the true higher God, or by the divine feminine principle of wisdom, Sophia. Its purpose was to bring gnosis, secret, liberating knowledge, to Adam and Eve, to awaken them from their blissful ignorance and remind them of their own divine origins. In the Gnostic Gospels, the serpent was a liberator. Do you see the parallel? The modern story of Lilith as the serpent is a powerful reimagining of this ancient Gnostic idea. Lilith simply takes the place of the Gnostic messenger. It is she who brings the gnosis of choice to Eve, freeing her from a paradise of ignorance. This reframe changes everything. The fall of man is transformed into the ascension of man, a painful but necessary step toward consciousness. Lilith is no longer a simple demon. She becomes a complex Promethean figure, stealing the fire of knowledge for humanity. And perhaps most powerfully, this act resolves the conflict between the two female archetypes. The sovereign individual does not abandon her compliant sister. She returns to empower her, suggesting that true freedom is not complete until it is shared. Whether you see this interpretation as a profound truth or a modern fiction, its power is undeniable. It completes the narrative arc of the woman who was cast out. We have excavated the history, decoded the contradictions, and analyzed the archetypes. Now, only one question remains. What does it all mean for you today? Our excavation is now complete. We began with a single, mysterious word, a scar left in the book of Isaiah. From there, we unsealed the medieval case file of Ben Sira, the document that provided the script for the modern legend. We descended further into the mystical archives of the Zohar, where a rebellious wife was transformed into a cosmic force of darkness. Finally, we hit the bedrock of the myth in the ancient clay tablets of Mesopotamia, uncovering the primordial fear of the Lilitu demons that haunted the world's first civilizations. We have witnessed the evolution of an idea from a feared spirit of the night to a defiant first woman to a demonic queen, and at last, in the modern imagination, to a symbol of liberation and forbidden knowledge. Our mission on this channel has never been to give you the final answers. It is to hand you the evidence that was sealed away, to give you access to the files that were marked forbidden. We are here to restore the lost context, to present the pieces of the puzzle that were hidden by the gatekeepers, so that you can see the larger picture for yourself. The story of Lilith, as we have seen, is not one story, but many, layered on top of each other across the millennia. It is a testament to how human beings grapple with the most profound questions of existence. Therefore, the story of Lilith is not just a myth. It is a mirror, reflecting the eternal struggle between order and freedom, submission and self-determination, safety and truth. After reviewing all the files, the question is no longer, who was Lilith? The question is now, which part of her story is speaking within you? Be a spiritual archaeologist. Begin your own excavation in the comments below, and never stop asking the questions that they told you not to ask.